I'm one of those weirdos who likes to bring my laptop, phone, and games with me when I go camping. I was raised in the foothills of Northern California, so I was pretty often going on camping trips, whether with the Boy Scouts, my youth group, my family, and in pretty much all of those situations I was surrounded by people who insisted that camping was about connecting with nature, and you couldn't do that properly if you still had any kind of interaction with all that pesky, distracting technology. But I liked technology. I liked camping and hiking too, but I also liked video games. I slept easier listening to a CD playing from my Walkman. I liked writing on my laptop, surrounded by giant pine trees and chirping birds. I liked all of these things. I still do, and I never really understood why they were supposed to be so at odds with each other, when I always appreciated my technological tools and entertainment in tandem with the beauty of nature. In fact, I'm willing to bet I'm the only person in history who's played a Nintendo DS at the top of a volcano. It was Mount Lassen and Elite Beat Agents specifically, and obviously I welcome any and all challengers to this throne. Hello, I'm the Game Professor, and welcome to Games is Lit 101. It should come as no surprise that I've always been a little bit sensitive to and cynical of nature versus technology stories. And I'm not talking about nature versus industry, like Final Fantasy VII or Flower, but the more personal narratives, the ones that treat a connection to nature like an inherently and vitally good thing and a connection to technology as a destructive and dehumanizing one. I believe technology can be, and often is, a good thing, something that empowers and connects us. So media that presents it as inherently dividing and separating us, or even dehumanizing us, has always kind of rubbed me the wrong way. A Short Hike is a brief exploration game made by Adam Robinson Yu in 2019, and when it begins, it seems poised to tell precisely this kind of story. The player character, Claire, is out on an island, sitting bored in her cabin, and only ventures out of it to get cell phone reception. It's exactly the kind of picture we've seen painted of millennials and screen-addicted teens in the last few decades. Antisocial, unconcerned with the wonders around them, only reaching outside of themselves when they're deprived of their constant distraction. Claire's early characterization plays into a lot of these familiar and well-worn tropes. Her motivation seems self-serving, her phone seems more important to her than the island or any of the people on it, and she seems pretty much entirely uninterested in the natural beauty of this place she's found herself in. Then there's one of my favorite scenes, when a local fisherman teaches her, and the player, how to fish. See, kids these days just don't have the patience to just sit there and enjoy what they're doing, right? They always need their distraction, and if it doesn't happen quickly enough, they get bored, and yeah, I mean, as someone who is personally very bored by fishing, I found this scene very entertaining, but we can see how the game is perfectly positioned to play into tropes about realizing the value of nature over the distracting wastefulness of technology. But it's more than just that narrative setup. Even the game's basic design, its mechanics and goals, seem poised to play into this idea as well. A Short Hike is an exploration-based game. The ultimate goal is to get to the top of the mountain, but the player can't do so as they are at the start. They need to collect feathers so Claire can fly and climb higher, and doing so requires exploring, collecting money, and doing favors for others on the island. So the gameplay mostly consists of exploring the island, the very thing Claire seemed uninterested in doing from the start, and just the kind of nature-centric activity that could easily be seen as the antithesis of Claire's apparent phone obsession. So, it's pretty obvious where the game is going with this, right? Claire's gonna explore the island, have some fun, make some friends, and ultimately decide that maybe that signal she's been searching for isn't all that important after all. Maybe she'll even get all the way to the top of the mountain and not care about the signal that it gives her phone because it's just so beautiful, and whatever's going on in her phone must surely not be as important as just enjoying this gorgeous place, right? I've seen it a million times, and I saw it coming a mile away. But thankfully, I was very wrong. Though, in all fairness, the game did little to dissuade me from this notion early on. The language at the beginning is of getting away from the city and taking a break from everything going on. Claire's dialogue early on informs the player she's waiting for a call, but doesn't clarify whether it's actually important, and she extols the virtues of the city over the island. And the description of the phone in the player's inventory notes that even the games don't work out here, further enforcing the notion that Claire is dependent on her phone and bored without its ability to distract her. But A Short Hike is far more conscientious and thoughtful about its subject matter than I had initially given it credit for, which is of course why I wanted to talk about it in this video. Spoilers ahead from this point forward. If you haven't played it, I recommend you do. It's one of my favorite games of 2019, and I emphasize, as always, that listening to me talk about a game is a very poor substitute for actually experiencing it yourself. I really should just make that the tagline for the series at this point. Look, the point is, it's good, and it's cheap, and you should play it. Anyway, the game starts to subtly subvert its apparent direction pretty much immediately. Exactly where this happens first varies from player to player, playthrough to playthrough, but one way or another, they come across someone else. Maybe it's the kid who wants 15 shells for mysterious reasons. Maybe it's the friend who lends Claire a compass. Maybe it's the kid who's surprised to find out there are small shovels specifically for building sandcastles. Or maybe it's the 2 local members of the climbing club that are very excited to get to the top of the mountain. But one way or another, the player quickly finds themselves helping the other people around the island. Now, this isn't an immediate contradiction to the apparent direction of the story, of course. After all, connecting with other people is right up there with connecting with nature in terms of things that you apparently can't do very well if you use your phone a lot, however false that idea may be, in my opinion. But also, it's just a really common thing to do in these kinds of exploration-heavy games. Someone asks you to do a thing, you do it, they give you an item that helps you grow or progress. It's all part of the process, and we players have a tendency to take common gameplay mechanics for granted. There's pretty much an entire genre of video games that exist to take advantage of that fact. But however everyday this game structure may feel, the gameplay of a game, the stuff that we do in it from moment to moment, is an important component of what makes a game mean whatever it means. Story began, after all, in video games as little more than context, a justification for why the game is having the player do what they do. So, of course, the gameplay that story exists to explain, justify, and contextualize is an important part of a game's message. But the meaning of these mechanics isn't usually all that noticeable. A part of this is because we don't tend to think too hard about things that we're already familiar with, right? No one's going into a first-person shooter wondering, "Ooh, I wonder what this gameplay format means," because it's a first-person shooter. We've played plenty of them, we know how they work, and we go. But more importantly, generally speaking, the gameplay of a given game tends to fit fine with what the story is doing. I don't want to spend too long talking about ludonarrative dissonance and resonance because we've all heard it plenty already, but the short version is that a game is most effective when the message of its story and the message of its gameplay line up, at least on a superficial level. Call of Duty's gameplay, for instance, is about heroic use of force to overcome opposition, and the story is about that too, rarely taking steps to challenge the overarching notion either of physical supremacy or the heroism of it. So you don't usually see people talking about what the gameplay means with these games, it's just a seamless part of the whole. In more integrated examples, the gameplay actively builds on the same themes as the story, such as the truth-seeking mechanics of Ace Attorney, or the mountain-climbing mechanics of Celeste, or the non-violent problem-solving of Undertale. And other times, a game will intentionally cultivate dissonance, seeking to unsettle the player and lay bare the hypocrisy inherent in a lot of game design principles. All this to say, when we're considering what a game's story is trying to mean, it's usually worth considering what the player spends most of their time in the game doing and what it accomplishes. In the case of a short hike, it mostly comes down to two things. The first is obvious: exploration. The player wanders the game world, finding items and people who help them toward their goal. And that last bit is what really works with the game's themes. Exploring the island is fun, and it has its own meaning in the big picture of the game, but Claire isn't just running around an island, and she can't get to the peak just by finding random things. She needs to talk to people, get to know them, familiarize herself with their needs, and put effort into caring for them. As much as exploring the island is the core of the game's mechanics, it's not possible to do without these positive, helpful interactions with the other people there. And considering the care and effort put into making those interactions charming and enjoyable, I'd say they're just as much a focus of the game's overall design as the exploration itself. And second, while the overall goal may simply be to reach the peak of the mountain, the actual process of doing that is a whole lot more than just traveling and exploring. It's also about coming across a bunch of other people and caring enough to stop and help them with whatever's going on. Claire's short hike becomes longer when she takes the time to care about others and see what she can do to help them. We see the game's thematic focus shift from the value of nature to the value of interpersonal connections. We enjoy and appreciate the beauty of the island as we explore it and find value in what it contains, as do many of the people we talk to. But the real heart of a short hike is found in Claire's conversations and activities with the people she encounters along the way. Now, I know it's taken me a while to get to the point. I've spent a lot of time so far talking about what a short hike is doing without really addressing why. And that's because that's what the game does too. It's the climax of this adventure that really snaps it all into focus. Claire reaches the top of the mountain and is immediately awed by its beauty. Beauty she never would have seen had she simply stayed put, facing her phone down by the beach. It's a beautiful moment, and one the game lets linger for just long enough to really sink in. Then it's interrupted by a phone call. Claire reaches down, looks at her phone, and we know where this is going. "Not right now," she'll say, pressing the button to silence the pestering device. And she'll continue to shun her phone in favor of appreciating the beautiful nature she took for granted. But that's not what happens. Instead, she picks up and speaks to her mother. Claire's mom is undergoing surgery. For what, the game doesn't specify, but Claire went on this trip knowing that her mom was undergoing something important and potentially dangerous, and she wasn't trying to get cell phone signal just so she could distract herself with her phone. She was waiting to find out whether someone she loved was going to be okay. This reveal completely shatters the entire nature versus technology thing the game seemed poised to go for up to this point. Because not only is the cell phone in this scene used for a very emotional and human and vulnerable moment with another person, but we come to understand that Claire was never just bored and trying to get cell phone signal so she could play on her phone and ignore the world around her. This was her intention all along. And suddenly, the gameplay emphasis up to this point is far more clear. All that exploration, all those favors, all the items that let us progress and explore even further, all the money we've been collecting, it was all in service to others. And ourselves too, absolutely. They're the way that we can get to the end of the game, but don't think that's beside or against the point. Claire's goals were only possible because of the relationships she cultivated along the way, and everyone's lives were enriched by coming into contact with her, including her own. It's true that none of this would have happened had Claire simply remained buried in her phone the entire time. But again, that was never the point. She was concerned about someone that she loved. Technology in a short hike is a bridge to connecting with others, just like jumping and flying and exploring a beautiful island and even collecting money. All of this that we do in the game, the technology included, is just a way for us to better understand and love the people around us. The game is very optimistic and hopeful, of course. We're all aware of the fact that our connections to others, to technology, to nature, they can all be tenuous, strained, even harmful. But they don't have to be. And that's what a short hike is about. The game may be largely about exploring an island, but what truly gives it meaning is the connections that we forge with other people along the way, all in service to the idea that whether on a mountain or through a cell phone, if we give of ourselves to others, everyone wins. Thanks as always for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed the video, you know the drill. Like, subscribe, share, all that stuff. And of course, if you really enjoy the channel, any amount you can support it on Patreon is greatly appreciated. Stay tuned for a literary analysis of DS cult classic Ghost Trick Phantom Detective. I'll see you then.